welcome to another Healing Matters episode. I'm so glad you were able to join us. I am your host, Pastor Diandra Williams, and I'm so glad you are able to tune in. We are moving in a new, fresh direction. We're going to be talking about the pandemic, the effects of the pandemic, how everyone is navigating through. We're going to have some special guests. We're going to have some psychologists. We're going to have some people sharing their story of how things have changed in their life due to the pandemic. And today we have a special guest, Pastor Latoya Moseley, with us. And she's going to be sharing her testimony and her story of how she's navigating through this pandemic and the effects that has had on her body, on her mind, on her spirit, and how she's navigating her church through this time as well. So introduce yourself to the audience, if you don't mind.
Hi, again, as she said, I am Pastor Latoya Moseley. I co-pastor Bread of Life International Worship Center located in East Providence. It is a joy. Thank you so much for having me on your show today.
Thank you for being with us. So let's talk a little bit about COVID. I know you've experienced having COVID last year, right after you gave birth. So when did you find out you had COVID?
Well, COVID, yeah. I know everybody hears that word and they like, oh, yeah. It's still here, right? And it still exists, and it is a real thing, and it's hitting people's homes, and it's hitting real people, right?
It is. It is.
Wow. So, yes, in fact, I gave birth to my son, Josiah, August 26th. Just during that time, had been going through a lot mentally, a lot emotionally. For me, I felt like, wow, I've gone all of this time, like 18, 19 months through a pandemic, a whole pregnancy through the pandemic, and I hadn't been touched directly by COVID.
Yes.
It hadn't knocked on my door or my household. And I was grateful, very grateful for that. Made it through my entire pregnancy scot-free, right? And gave birth to my son. Actually, prior to that, I had lost my dad in August, and we had his funeral service the same weekend before I was going to be induced to have my son Josiah. His service was the Saturday. I was supposed to be induced on Sunday, but it got moved to Monday. Long story short, I ended up being admitted to the hospital on Monday, had the baby Thursday, and got home and eventually tested positive for COVID-19. My husband was at the hospital with me the whole time during my quote-unquote labor and delivery.
Awesome.
And the induction process took what felt like forever. They tested me as soon as I got to the hospital. Obviously, I tested negative.
Negative, yeah.
Had the baby, and was still, I was feeling okay. That particular day, my husband had gotten a call from my sister-in-law because she was at the house watching the kids. She had gotten a call, and he had gotten a call from her, and I guess she told him that one of our sons had a fever, which is this son, he barely ever gets sick. Right. And my husband was like, oh, gee whiz, he has a fever, probably should get him tested. In fact, why don't you just get the whole house tested, right?
Right, yeah.
So unbeknownst to me, that's like what they were doing while I was,
at the hospital?
Yeah, at the hospital, right?
Wow.
And I guess, he didn't want me to, undergo like any more stress than what I was feeling from burying my dad to getting ready to give birth and so on and so forth. So he didn't really tell me that right away. But then right after I delivered the baby, my husband had said that he was going to go home and go check on the kids, which he was doing. But I noticed that he kept saying that he was freezing. He's like, love, it's freezing in here. And I'm like, it's a hospital. Like, they keep it cold for a reason, right?
Yeah.
Mind you, I'm hot.
Yeah.
And he's like, hey, it's really cold. He's like, I should go home and get my sweater, so on and so forth. But he was just like freezing cold. So he left. And I guess when he left, he went to go get tested.
Wow.
And his test came back positive. And I'm like, what? So he calls and he's like, love, I won't be back. And I'm like, what do you mean you won't be back? Like, I just had the baby. He's like, it can't come back. He's like, Jalen's positive. I'm positive. I said, positive for what? He's like, COVID. And of course, I'm like, what? And now I'm like, oh my goodness, I just had a newborn, and oh my goodness, and you were here, and we were here, and so on and so forth. So long story short, they were positive. And then by the time I got discharged from the hospital, I was still negative. And then I went home, and then I was home like Monday, Tuesday, and I got really sick. Then I tested eventually, and then I was positive. And right away, I got really ill and really sick, like really fast. And I just was like, oh my goodness, like I'm here taking care of the baby. My husband and my other son is quarantined on the lower level of the house. I'm upstairs with the newborn and our youngest son and our other sons. It was crazy.
Right.
And it was trying to navigate those waters, being home, just giving birth, just physically weak, emotionally, quote unquote, a little unstable, just like, what's going on,
Yeah.
But I got sick, and I got sick really, really fast. And before I knew it, it just kept hitting me, and I just kept getting worse and worse and worse.
So you said you got sick. What were your initial symptoms?
So the initial symptoms was a severe, like a headache that I just couldn't shake. I couldn't get rid of no matter what, but it was really severe, really bad. And then my body was like on fire, like literally like drenched from like head to toe, like watermarks on the sheet, wet, like drenched. And like I literally could go like this to my shirt, and you just feel like, sweat, wet. And I was just like, oh my goodness, like what is going on? And so those were some of my like first symptoms. And then I noticed that even if it was daytime or nighttime, that my body just was not cooling off. It was just like fire, like just hot and sweaty, and just the head, my eyelashes hurt, my teeth hurt.
Oh my goodness, yeah, that's a lot.
Like, no, real deal.
On top of already your body trying to recover from giving birth.
Yeah.
So yeah, you were really definitely going through the ringers. So what made you decide not to go to hospital? What was that transition period between receiving the notice that you was positive for COVID and your treatment?
Well, at first I was just kind of like, oh, I'll probably just have like flu-like symptoms. But I was like, oh, this is more than flu-like symptoms. Like I literally, I was already physically completely drained. So I was like, okay, what's, postpartum, what's COVID?
Right,
You know
how
what
do
I
you
mean?
separate
Like what's
the two?
what,
Yeah.
But I just felt like I was just hit like by a mad truck, like literally. But what was, as the days went on, it began to affect my respiratory. And then that's when I got concerned, because I'm like, okay, my husband is downstairs, with our other son that's sick. Everybody else in the house is masked. I can't really do much, but I'm doing what I can because I have a newborn.
Yeah, the baby.
And also trying to take care of, Justice, who was 3, and then our other 2 boys. So I was weak, tired, like exhausted, and on top of that, nursing the baby and just everything. And I'm just like, what? And then I'm like, wait, should I nurse? Am I supposed to be nursing? Like, like what am I supposed to do?
True. Yeah.
So when it started to affect my respiratory, I literally just felt like there was like an elephant. There's no other way that I can describe it. I just felt like there was like something heavy, like an elephant, like sitting on my chest. And I was just like, okay, so at what point do I go to the hospital? You know what I mean? At what point do I go to the ER? At what point do I call my doctor? So eventually I called my doctor and I told her, I was like, I can't breathe. I'm like, my chest is hurting. Like I'm coughing constantly. I'm like, this is really, it's really bad. And my doctor said, well, it sounds like, if your respiratory is being affected in that manner, then, I don't want you to wait before it's too late. You probably should go and get seen, So she's like, oh, make sure you're taking your pulse ox and, all that stuff. So we had the little, thing you put on your finger to monitor and stuff like that. And she's like, listen, if it drops and it gets lower than like a 94, and this and that, she's like, I need you just to leave and go, So I was like, okay. And I kind of was just monitoring it. But to be honest with you, because I've experienced the flu before, never experienced COVID. And everything that you've seen on TV, all the stories that you hear of people, it's almost like they're doing okay, or they have like this downward, and then before you know it's just like boom.
Yeah.
So I'm like trying to watch for signs that I don't even know what the signs really are. You know what I mean? So I'm like, well, if my chest starts, or I start hyperventilating, or I'm trying to be ahead of the game, but yet I don't even know what to expect.
Right.
So I just kept saying, no, it's going to be fine. I'm going to be fine. And then it was like 98, then 97, then I was going down to 96, then I was going down to 95, then it was 94. My husband's like, we're going.
Yeah, that's it.
You know,
Yeah.
But I was afraid to go in a sense, because I'm like, man, I don't want to end up in the hospital. I don't want to end up on a ventilator. I don't want things to get worse. I don't want to be here for my family. I don't want to be here for my newborn. So I was just like, kind of like, can I be home? And then that's when my doctor had offered, like, well, let's get you the monoclonal antibody treatment. Let's get it ordered. The ambulatory services will come to your house. They administer it to you in your house. And then they'll stick around for about 45 minutes to ensure that you're okay. And she's like, I believe that will keep you out of the hospital. And I was just like, well, if it's going to keep me out of the hospital, well,
I'm all for it, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I hung up the phone, and of course I'm second guessing, like, oh, what is this? Do I really want this? Like, are there enough studies? Like, what,
Yeah, all of those questions come into play, absolutely.
So I felt just really overwhelmed. Is it safe for me? Is it safe for the baby to have it while I'm nursing, so on and so forth. And, I, of course, went on the internet and, asked people. And I struggled with it for a little while, and I asked my husband, what he thought, and, we prayed about it, so on and so forth. And I said, well, if it's going to keep me out of the hospital, because my symptoms just kept, like, to me, seems to be getting worse.
Yeah.
Especially with, like, my breathing and stuff. So they ended up, ordering some inhalers and other stuff to help me. But yeah, so they came in, and eventually I did get that treatment. And honestly, when the two nurses came in from the ambulatory services, they were like, wow, you really should be in the hospital.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, and I was weak, and I was coughing, and, I was in tough shape. But I was like, no, my doctor said that, I could try this, and, I'm praying it works, And he's like, no. When we see people, like, in your condition, they're already hospitalized, And I said, well, let's give it a try, So they set everything up there in my bedroom, and when they first started to administer it, I was having a bad reaction to it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, when they first did. I felt like my chest, like everything was just, I was like, no, you gotta stop,
Oh my goodness.
And he's like, what's happening? I was like, I don't know, my heart is weird, and it's racing, and it doesn't feel right, and I'm like, I can't breathe, And they stopped everything, and they gave me like a few moments and stuff, and, eventually he's like, okay, I think that, you're probably just anxious, so on and so forth. And I was like, no, I felt something happening into my heart when you started doing that in my lungs. But ultimately, we regrouped, and he started it again, and I laid my head back, and then, I got the treatment. And he was like, within 24 hours to 48 hours, you should feel a world of a difference. And I was like, okay, so they monitored, and eventually, they left. Mm-hmm. And I received that treatment.
So would you say the treatment was definitely the reality of, okay, I have COVID, I got to deal with this? Yeah.
It was, because prior to that, honestly, in my head, and I don't want people to think I'm being dramatic, but literally, like, it was this internal, like, mental battle I was having, like, gee whiz, like, a lot of people have lost their life to this.
Yeah.
And there are people that had underlying conditions and people that didn't have underlying conditions, and gee whiz, like, they didn't make it out of COVID.
That's right.
That's right. I was battling that mentally at the same time, praying and saying, okay, Lord, I trust you. And if it's my time to go, and we're all going to go at some point,
yes.
Whether it's COVID or something else. But I'm like, Lord, gee whiz, after all I've been through, I'm to pass away from COVID. You know what I mean?
Is this it?
But you never know.
Yeah.
You don't know. So in my head, I just was like, okay, God, I just buried my father. Like, my health is compromised already.
Yes,
I'm in a vulnerable state, like, and I don't know which way this is gonna go. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I don't know if it's gonna get worse. I don't know if you just wake up and then all of a sudden you can't breathe. Like, I don't know. And I don't even think doctors know. I think it just happened. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it just happened. Yeah, life takes its course with COVID.
And to each his own. Like, everybody's body doesn't respond the same way or act the same way.
Right.
So it's almost like I was always waiting for, like, the shoe to drop. Mm-hmm. Being prayerful, but also like, okay, well, what if it takes a turn for the worse?
Right.
Like,
And
let me
that's
not
where it
wait.
challenges your faith,
Yeah.
honestly. Do you think you could say, all right, this is where faith and reality meet the road?
It most certainly did, because I've laid in my bed at night, honestly speaking, saying, okay, Father, if this is my time to go, or if I don't recover from this, or if my breathing gets more labored or worse, like, and I don't make it to the hospital on time because I'm sitting here waiting, you know what I mean? Yeah, so I prayed a lot, and I was nervous. I literally was, because I didn't know, like, okay, if I went to sleep, do you just wake up and you can't breathe? Like, I didn't know what to expect.
Yeah.
And I didn't know. It was the unknown with any sickness, the unknown of what's going to happen.
Which is the scary part. I think the scary part of COVID, because everybody does have a different reaction, is how will this affect me? And will I be prepared? Yeah. Will I be prepared? Will my family be prepared? And you're a pastor, and so would your church be prepared for the next steps, whatever that would have been? How did your church respond to you having COVID?
I think everybody was prayerful because they were concerned,
yes.
obviously. Amongst all of us in my household that ended up, being positive for COVID, my symptoms being the worst, obviously, possibly it was because I just had given birth.
Yes.
And I was at a more vulnerable state than everyone else. But the church was concerned, and they were, prayerful. They reached out, they brought meals and stuff like that. But yeah, people were concerned. Yeah. I mean, they were worried. And our families were worried. Like,
Absolutely.
What? And they were like, well, what about the newborn? Like, what about the baby? What about everyone else, So I think overall, everybody was concerned about what the outcome was going to be. It's you always hope for the best.
Yes.
But again, life is unpredictable, and
you don't know.
You don't know.
You don't know. And it's so good to hear you say that your church responded well, because sometimes we deal with the reality of it, but we also need our support system to deal with it in the background, and praying and having hope, because that gives you strength as well. Like you said, you were vulnerable. You had just lost your dad, just giving birth, and so you needed that boost of energy from your parishioners.
Absolutely.
Praying.
And they definitely
to pull
were.
you through,
Yeah.
to pull you through. And a lot of people don't have that support system. So it's a blessing to hear you say that, to also encourage other people, like, pray for your leaders during this time. Pray for those who are going through COVID, who might not be in a space in their walk.
That's right.
To pray for themselves.
Absolutely. Because it's almost like even during that time, it's like you just feel like I'm in a house surrounded by people who love me, right?
Yes.
But we were also separated because of COVID.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's trying to protect each other. Like, my husband literally, and this is when quarantine was 14 days, 10 to 14 days.
That's right, yeah.
So, you got my husband downstairs with one child. I'm in my room with the baby, and then, like, the other kids are, you know what I mean? So it's almost like everybody's trying to be in protective mode to protect each other.
Right.
But I remember during that time, I didn't even speak to members from our church, because I couldn't even, I was so weak and so labored to breathe that I didn't even talk on the phone.
Oh my goodness.
Like, people would call to try to check. Even, like, I have my Aunt Edna, like, she's like, oh, sweetheart, I'm just checking on you, Mm-hmm. But it's like I couldn't even talk on the phone. Like, right. I couldn't even talk on the phone.
Yeah, you were that exhausted.
Right? Like,
that exhausted.
And between that and the coughing and, like, phlegm and blood, just horrible. Just horrible. And I'm grateful to God that I didn't end up in a hospital or with blood clots or, any of the other symptoms that people have experienced, that I was able to be home and I was able to be treated at home. And, I'm grateful for that, because I don't know, had I not received the treatment, like, I remember calling my cousin Isha. She lives in North Carolina. I called her. She's a nurse. And I was like, I'm like, we're not calling her, but we went back and forth on Messenger because I was struggling. So we went back and forth on Messenger, and I'm like, I'm real struggling over here. I'm like, what do you think? Mm-hmm. And she's like, it's going to keep you out of the hospital. Right. She was like, I would do it. Just get the treatment, get the treatment. And, I was just like, okay. that helped me.
Of course,
a lot.
of course, you need that encouragement, somebody who's dealing with this and say, all right, I think this is for your benefit, because sometimes that's a faith move too, having somebody confirm what you're thinking and saying, all right, this is the next step. Sometimes we can block out the voice of God because we're like, nope, I got it. I got this covered. And he's like, nah, girl, you better go get that treatment.
Listen, I'm so glad I did. Because even though, honestly speaking, most people get results like within like the first 24 hours.
Yes.
I don't know why mine was a little delayed. But within 48 hours, I can honestly say that I started to feel like a lot better.
Right.
And it helped me like kind of turn the corner. Because prior to turning the corner, it just felt like, I don't want to over exaggerate, but the truth of the matter is I literally just felt, it was like 30 times worse than the flu.
Oh my goodness.
You know how bad you feel with the flu.
Yeah.
So like, if that was my quote unquote, my worst case encounter with COVID, to me, I literally felt like, I just felt like I was dying. Like I literally felt like, oh my goodness, like, could this really take me out? Like seriously.
Were you afraid?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I really was. And a lot of things don't scare me, right? A lot of things don't scare me, but that, listen, I was like, okay, God. I mean, I know I'm good. I know I'm at peace with you.
Yes.
I was like, but I really would like to stay. No, seriously, I really would like to enjoy my family, my husband, my newborn baby. Like, God, I know you're not gonna do me like this. Meaning, like, I know this can't be the end for me.
Yes, yeah.
Because it's so real, and we've seen so many people like lose their life. Like so many people that don't even make it to hospitals, that transition at home, or people with underlying health conditions and people that didn't have any underlying health conditions.
Absolutely.
So yes, I was afraid.
Absolutely.
Fear did knock at my door, and I'm not gonna say I answered it, but it showed up. Yeah. And I was like, okay, this is what I feel, but I'm not gonna live here.
Yes.
Right. I feel afraid. Right. I do. I feel overwhelmed, but I'm not gonna camp out here. You know what I mean? I had to, pray. I had to worship. I had to, remember.
Yeah. Who you are and whose you are, as we say, right? Yeah. Worship, break the atmosphere and kind of places us in a realm where it's like we're outside of ourselves, and it's like, all right, Lord, in spite of this, you're still God.
That's right.
He knows you had a baby. He knows you had a family. He knows you had a church that loves you, and a whole bunch of people that want to see you well. But would you worship? Yeah. Would you worship? Yeah. Would you be the example? The word says, in the valley of shadows of death. You was in the valley. You was in the shadow.
And what's it say? I will fear no evil.
Fear no evil.
Your rod and your staff, they comfort me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but So in my humanness, I absolutely felt all of it. The good, the bad, the ugly, the indifferent. I felt it. I even felt alone. I'm like, God, come on, like really? Seriously, if I could just be real. I was like, come on, like, come on, out of all of this, and now my entire family is laid out by COVID, and I'm feeling like the worst.
Right.
Like, come on, like, but I know that God was present, and I know that He was there, and that He never left my side.
And I'm glad you shared your testimony, and I'm glad that you and your family made it out all right. Like the word says, God is a present help in the time of trouble.
Yes.
And I'm so glad that even in these troubling times, your testimony is going to be a help to somebody else. What you shared is going to bless somebody else to get through COVID and to get through these trying times. And it's also going to bless a congregation of people that might be afraid to go to church, that might be praying for their leaders that are suffering with COVID. And so thank you from the bottom of my heart sharing your testimony and your story, because I know it's going to encourage somebody else and help them to, get through this season. So thank you, our audience, for watching our Pastor Latoya Moseley. Thank you for listening and tuning in. Please don't forget to share your comments and to subscribe to our channel. Until next time, I'm your host, Lady D.